Hello, I am Dustin Pickering. This is Parrot TV Literary Corner. Today we have Marc Olmsted. Allen Ginsberg said Marc Olmsted inherited Burroughs' scientific nerve and Kerouac's movie-minded line, nailed down with gold I-beam in San Francisco. Olmsted appeared in the volume New Directions in Prose and Poetry number 37, as well as in City Lights Journal, Outlaw Bible of American Poetry, and a large variety of small presses. He has 4 books of poetry: Milky Desire, Resume, What Use Am I, a Hungry Ghost, which has an introduction by Allen Ginsberg, and Fresh Lotus Rehab. Twice nominated for a Pushcart Prize, Olmsted received the San Francisco Acker Award for Poetry in 2014, along with David Meltzer and Ishmael Reed. And we have his website, marcolmsted.com, if you'd like more information. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Hi.
Nice to meet you here. So anything that's not in your bio you want to talk about yourself a little bit, give us some prompt. You've got everything going good.
I think you more than covered it.
So that's great. I'm glad that we have you on the show today, and I appreciate your time on here. So my first question will be, so you practice some Buddhist meditation, and I wondered how that works with your creative process.
Good question. Basically, this comes from Ginsberg himself, who studied with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And the notion is that mindfulness, a word that we hear a lot these days, means attention or awareness in the present. So a lot of my poetry, as inspired through Ginsberg and poets, for instance, like William Carlos Williams, is about that sort of attention and observing what's vivid. Probably all you need to know. Maybe if you have more questions, we could talk about it. That's
how does that factor into your poetry and your art? Do you write in the present moment? Is it sort of a meditative process?
I think that's accurate. When I sit down to write, and I try to write daily, I usually am not sure what I'm going to write about. So I basically begin with what's ever on my mind. As Philip Whalen, who became a Zen master in his later life, was friends with Kerouac and Ginsberg, very serious Buddhist student, but he said, my poetry is a graph of the mind moving.
Yes.
And I think that's of great interest to the beats and what is critically called the post beats, of which I align myself.
Okay.
Post beats meaning only that it occurs after 1965. That's
very interesting. And what brought you into that circle originally?
Well, it was, first of all, was becoming aware of Ginsberg's poetry as a teenager, largely because, my father, he was a big fan of literature and Edgar Allan Poe, and actually recorded some Poe back in the day. He was a radio actor. And this led to an interest in Ray Bradbury. And he read to me Ray Bradbury, and eventually I began reading Ray Bradbury. And the one thing about Bradbury that I think is particularly good, like in the Martian Chronicles, is his use of metaphor. And so that became something that really excited me, the idea that we put these two images together that might not be necessarily related, and it would produce this extraordinary third image. And of course, when I became aware of Ginsberg's Howl, and, particularly the section on Moloch, that was very specifically of interest to me. But, you know, as a
Hmm.
teenager, you know, I just went, wow, this is a great way of writing. And
Right.
eventually this led to a correspondence. And then finally I happened to stumble into a Chogyam Trungpa lecture by accident, or whatever you want to call it in
Hmm.
medium terms, in Berkeley. I had no idea it was even there. I was going to see a friend of mine on campus working in the library. Somebody asked me directions as to where this Trungpa lecture was. And I said, he's lecturing here now? I'd read about him. And he was very wild. Trungpa was a very wild master,
Hmm.
spoke impeccable English. He was Oxford educated. Here he was in a suit, sitting in a chair, drinking sake and obviously intoxicated and smoking a cigarette. And this was so completely not what I had seen in terms of a spiritual person,
Hmm.
that I was quite thrilled. Really,
I bet.
you know, he was
Very
very,
counterintuitive.
he was
Yeah.
so wild. Yeah, he was so wild and so
Hmm.
clear in talking. And Ginsberg was there. And so I met Ginsberg there, and I saw Trungpa for the first time in 1974. And this led to learning how to sitting practice, which
Hmm.
very briefly stated is essentially sitting straight, straight spine. It can sit in a chair, eyes open, attention to the out breath, dissolving into space. That's just very simple sitting instruction. And that became sort of a backbone
Hmm.
of my practice from then on, which was very sloppy, by the way. I have to say,
Right.
you know, I
Hmm.
was very, very sloppy for a good 11 years, mostly due to drinking and drugs. I'm quite a mess.
So you really went into that beatnik lifestyle there.
Uh,
Yeah.
let's say I didn't really even have to. I was already just kind of
There. Yeah.
genetically predisposed alcoholics. You know, it was nothing particularly willing about
Right.
it.
Yeah. It's very tough too. It's a very tough life to live.
Oh yeah, it would have killed
Yeah.
me. I had to
Yeah.
stop, and
Absolutely.
it
It's
did kill many of our mutual heroes, who are, you know, as we well
yeah.
know.
Yeah. So you taught at Naropa as well. What did you teach? And I'm curious, like in the teaching process, it's also a learning process, obviously. Um, did you learn anything new or anything fresh in teaching?
Well, you know, you always. I think one of the most exciting things about uh, teaching poetry and always trying to introduce mindfulness practice, which is what Allen Ginsberg did. Who, by the way, I should say right now, this is the date. This very date today is the date of his passing.
Yes, that is right. Yes, it is.
He died today. I realized it
Was it
myself.
95, 1995, or 90?
Nine
No, it was mid 90s.
seven,
Was it?
I think.
Yeah. I
97.
bought I
April.
first bought his first book that I bought for myself. I think it was the very same day he died. Like I just bought it. I was like, this looks interesting. And I've been reading Kerouac, and that was a weird coincidence. Like I bought it that very same day, or it was like right in that period, like right in this time of year that like I think it was 97. And I was like 15, 16 years old. I was in high school, just picked it up and I was like, wow, I love this. And it's like, it looked interesting. So that was kind of an interesting coincidence. Same thing happened with Buddy Holly. I think there's like a spirit moving through things or something that's like,
Oh,
hey, pick this
absolutely.
up. Yeah, yeah,
What
definitely.
was it, by the way? Do you remember?
It was his selected poetry.
Oh, sure,
It had a
sure.
painting of him on it. And I
Yes,
eventually got his collected volume and read that
right.
too. So I've read a
Yeah.
lot of his poetry several times. And of course, I've had Hal since I was a kid,
Right,
I
sure.
had, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
going on with Naropa, what did,
Well, you know, when I taught at Naropa, I was with Tibetan, a great Tibetan Lama and friend, Anam Tupten Rinpoche, who's also a poet, very, very good poet. Uh,
mm-hmm.
who had met Alan almost like less than a year before his death. And so teaching with Anam Tuptenruche, basically we were trying to combine this notion of mindfulness and poetry in a way that was more legit, because you've got this great Lama there, and you've got, this amateur, Olmsted. And so just the trading off of that was interesting enough. We did that twice. And he reined it in a little in his own personal approach, because he was pretty wild himself in those days. I don't know. Do you know the Zen master EQ? Have you ever read any of his poetry?
I think so. Yes.
There's one collection called "The Crow with No Mouth."
Yes, I have that collection.
That one is the best. And his early Anam Tuptenruche's early poetry was very much like that. And I think his sense, the feedback that he got in his later persona, because he still remains very close teacher, was not to be so outrageous, because it definitely freaked people out. And some of the stuff I was reading freaked people out. And even I have dialed things back just because, you don't have to freak them out too much,
Right.
But at any rate, I think the main thing that's so interesting about attempting to give some sort of poetry instruction, which was all based really on Ginsberg's approach, he really developed this, was to see how good the students were. I think that's the most exciting thing, that when they get out of their own way and just sort of kind of train in a certain not too loose, not too tight style, they write a lot of really good poetry. Some of them complete beginners. In fact, some of the beginners write the best poetry, and it gets published. I mean, that's the main thing. It gets published again and again and again. I continue to teach through writers.com, and many of those students online, that is, many of the students get published, and that's very exciting, because that's something Alan always talked a lot about, getting published. That it was important to get your work out there. You're really writing to be seen and heard. So it's good. It's a good leap to make, to have enough confidence in one's own work to put it out there. There's a lot of rejection, but it's better than just writing privately and then you never really. You don't really have much confidence in yourself. Once you're a published poet, even if it's somebody else likes it enough to put it on a page, right? That's a big deal, as you probably know. I mean, you're like, somebody says, "Oh, I like this. Let's put it out." That's good. That's very
even online too. It's a nice feeling that someone acknowledges what you're doing and is well enough to give you space on their site or whatever. And definitely.
I think that's a kind of celebration. I don't think that's necessarily egotistical, because it just is a kind of connection, and everyone that's connecting. And of course, poetry community connects, and larger, one of the things that's always great to hear someone say after a poetry reading is, I don't usually like poetry, but I liked yours,
Yeah, absolutely. You're bringing people into the fold.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you mean it doesn't have to be boring and pretentious?
Right.
Stuff that I don't want to read and would pay not to hear.
Right. Right. That's all. It's good, because that's what I do when I do interviews or I do anything related to poetry. My goal is hopefully to see if I can reach a few people out there who are maybe in doubt or curious or not even interested, and they just happen to be standing there and they're like, wow, that was really interesting,
right?
How you presented that, or what you said in that. I one time had a guy that was from the UN that was sitting in on one of our readings one time. He just happened to be there, and he really liked my poetry. I was like, wow, that's great. It's always
Yeah,
nice to bring new people into your fold and get you people interested in what you're doing.
well, and I think also, like for instance, Ginsberg emphasized something that Whitman said, candor, and then
Yeah.
Ginsberg glossed that with candor ends paranoia, so that in a lot of ways, I mean, we see that in Ginsberg's work. He said a lot of things that people had not said before about their private lives and about their feelings. And I think that has a quality of like, oh, you mean everyone has these feelings? And that's a very positive thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think that's part of what poetry and art should be doing is,
I think
you're very personal, but there's a universal element to it, because whatever's within me could be within you and within the next guy and within the community of people, and they can adapt to it and learn from it and recognize themselves and all of that. And I
Now
think
let's
it's
go
definitely
back
a
to your
point.
poetry. Let's now look at your poetry. We,
yes,
we
yes,
we now want to go deeply into your own poetic world.
yes.
First, do you have one point to present first before we now go into maybe critical analysis of the content of the poem itself? Do you
Yes,
have a poem to present now?
I think so. I actually, since today was Alan's passing, I wrote a poem that is too long for presentation here, but I wanted to read just a section of it very shortly, literally learning of Alan's death. Let me see if there's any date here. It doesn't seem to be. The poem is called Knee Deep in Bones. And so I'm going to just jump into the middle of it. And I'm on retreat in upstate New York. And amazingly, I get this phone call. It's a phone call, 2 a.m. The famous old poet, friend for 23 years, calls to tell me he may be dead in a month. Terminal liver cancer, result of hepatitis C. You've been so good to me over all these years, he says. I'm startled. You've been so good to me. Then it's been a good thing. Will this be our last conversation? He got this phone number off my Berkeley answering machine for emergency only. I plan to finish retreat and visit him in Manhattan for a day. Stay in the new law. Must call my Lama for instructions. What to do if sudden dying bedside before then. My Lama tells me not to break retreat, gives me prayers to say if the poet dies. Up goes the plaque of mantras nailed to the back door porch. Retreat is closed on Female Wisdom Moon Day. 5th day. The answering machine clicks on, volume down, Frank from the Dharma Center. Allen Ginsberg is dead. The man who taught me to sit watching my breath like Buddha and how to write a poem is gone. 10 minutes before next session, weepy, I go to make a cup of tea. Time to start praying. Before I make it, I'm sobbing.
Wow.
So
That's in the kind of in a moment again, in the moment of it going on. So it's a chronicle of the actual event.
Right. I had no idea,
Wow.
when I was writing the poem, I was basically keeping a sort of poetic journal of the retreat. And suddenly the poem becomes all about dealing with Alan's death.
Wow.
It goes on, it's a month retreat. So
Wow.
it's definitely on my mind for a month. It's one of the most powerful deaths of my life. My father and the passing of Ginsberg. And I've lost my root teacher, Sergeant Rinpoche. those are very powerful guests, father figure guests.
Mm-hmm.
I think they may be the most powerful. Although now I'm losing friends, and that's a whole other fault.
Right.
Almost 68, so they're starting to drop.
Yeah, it's inevitable. It's part of the life process,
Isn't it?
Yeah, and I know what you mean. It's. I've had a lot of friends pass in the last few years myself, and it's very hard.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't think I've lost a father figure quite yet. I'm lucky in that regard, but it's bound to happen sometime. Yeah, I'm young. I'm 40, so
yeah. To me, that's
So I was listening. Yeah, I was listening to your version of Bird Brain with the job.
Yeah.
I thought that was very good. I love the music. What brought you into that? That style of music and forming that band and actually doing that with Ginsberg.
Well, ironically, as much as I liked Bird Brain, his more famous version, we're talking about back in the 80s, to our listeners. We're talking back in the 80s, I had a new wave band called The Job, and in San Francisco. And musicians that I was working with, very jazz oriented. In fact, kind of similar in Bird Brain to what John Lurie was doing in Lounge Lizards. Lurie's now on some home box office painting with John Lurie. Some show. I've watched a little bit of it. I don't know what to make of it. But at any rate, they came up, the band, Ginsberg wanted to do his tune that he had done with the Gluons, which was turned into a 45. And that's the version you usually hear. And the musicians said, this sounds like the Batman theme, I mean, they did not like it at all. And they said, we don't want to do this. We'll do our own version. Okay. And so that's what happened. And Ginsberg went along with it, but he actually said at the time, he said, I don't understand your aesthetic.
Well, he wrote the punk rock "You're My Big Crybaby" too, so that was.
Yeah. That's a good. He really had more of a pop. He really had a pop interest, and even though he liked, so he obviously he liked certain bands, but the weirder ones, I don't think he. Which was all the stuff that I love, all the kind of deconstructing bands like Devo, which were more discordant. And, he really wanted to write a pop song,
right,
and have to be a big hit, actually. And he thought Gluons was just fine.
Right.
The Gluons were just fine. I think a lot of people prefer that version. But that's how our version came around. I always thought that was very.
Just sort of like, we don't want to do this kind of music. Let's do something different.
Well, something that did them, really.
Right.
We collaborated a lot.
What exactly are you doing to sustain the legacy of Allen?
Well, I think part is to teach as he taught, which is, I'm in the middle of teaching a class on writing mindfulness, and in many ways to sustain the way in which he turned, as they say, turned the wheel of the Dharma, making Buddhism. You can't. Buddhism has a quality is really about attraction rather than promotion. Because it's not. You can't promote Buddhism, but you can make it seem more useful. And even you don't even have to call it Buddhism, but the idea of being awake, aware, present. some sort of sacred view of existence and also empathetic conduct, which is political, really.
Mm-hmm.
I remain politically active, although certainly COVID quarantine has majorly curbed my street efforts. I was afraid to go out when some of the more recent protests began to
Right.
help. But I regretted that, and I still would do it that way. But I do believe in peaceful protest, and that's very much in Alan's repertoire. Engaged, which would be in his case, engaged Buddhism.
Right.
The idea is of some sort of bringing out friendliness towards oneself and others.
So kind of cultivating an energy of some kind, a positive sense of self and
compassion.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things we're struggling so hard with in the United States right now. This incredible adversity. I have known in my day some right-wing people, and I have a friend who's a poet, Max Valerio, who studied at Naropa, trans male poet. He's pretty right-leaning, ironically. And we don't agree on a lot of things, but we remain friends. We're not going to fight over that. And an older Buddhist friend who also kind of surprised me with some reactionary tendencies. There has to be some sort of open communication. You can't just say, okay, you're an asshole, I'm done with you.
Right.
I think it's better to have some channels open. And that's really difficult, of course, when you have some of these Republican Senate people behaving so badly.
Yeah, it is. It's very tough in this day. We're being polarized. Maybe would you like to share another poem with us?
Sure. Let's see.
While you're looking at that, I also want to know, do you by any chance have anything to do with the National Beat Poetry?
You mean that they pick those beat poet laureates?
Yes, National Beat Poetry, founded by Debbie Tosul.
I'm a Facebook friend, but I've never heard anything from them. I don't really know what they're all about. So no, that would be the simple answer. But I'm not adverse to finding out what they can do.
They are really doing great to also sustain the legacy of Allen, and I feel that you need maybe one day. I'm sure you're going to get connected.
I think so. I saw Andy Clausen was connected with him just recently, and I've known Clausen for years, and he's a really great poet and protege of Ginsberg. So there's that. So yeah, someday that might happen. Okay, here's something. Since we're talking so much about Buddhism.
All right.
Buddhism is not smiling, wet-brained being everybody's bitch. Not a Xanax, getting saved, nor on the nod with Sunday school platitudes, correcting everyone while letting your child be a dick. Auschwitz concentration camp survivor Elie Wiesel suggested not to say anything about God that you can't say over a pit of burning babies. There are always burning babies.
Wow. That's quite perplexing to think about that.
Oh yeah, that's the whole. I think people are adverse to some sort of spirituality because they think like, well, how can God have permitted this?
Right.
Of course, in philosophy like Buddhism, it's non-theist. There is no creator God. As Kerouac said, mind alone introduced the bone. I
Right.
really like that very much. So that kind of ends that whole problem of having some sort of sacred view, but at the same time saying,
Something
well,
controlling and manipulating the, things going on in the world
yes,
is just more of like a
a very sadistic
mind
puppet
do it.
master. Yeah, very sadistic.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going
And
like,
that's pretty,
I'll teach them. They didn't do what I said. As I don't know if you've ever seen this
as I
great.
call it, God's Skinner box, treating Earth
Oh
like the
yeah,
Skinner box.
have I got a Skinner box for you? You heretic!
Yeah, there you
Oh, I'm
go.
gonna get you good.
Mm, fry you.
Yes, I'll
Uh,
fry you.
we got about 6 minutes or so left. If you have any, final things you want to say to the public out there listening in.
Well, why don't we end with one more poem? What do you say?
Okay.
That might be a good idea, unless you have any sort of question. Let's see. Okay.
If you are watching us for the first time, this is Parrot Literary Corner, and we're with Marc Olmsted, an ambassador of Allen Ginsberg. And today we are celebrating his legacy with Marc Olmsted. So he's there giving us a lot of information that we didn't even know. If you remember the first poem he presented today, it was really capturing, we could capture the image of what happened in the last part of the life of Allen Ginsberg. Over to you, Marc Olmsted.
All right, I'm going to leave it with one last poem. In 2010, I got to go to Tibet, and it was really already, Tibet is changing so radically because of Chinese occupation. There are now highways. They used to get around on horses. Now they all drive around on little motorbikes. It's changing very rapidly. So in this way, it's very heartbreaking. But there's still at higher altitudes. I was on a tour. I wasn't by myself. The Chinese apparently don't like the higher altitudes, which is understandable. It's really, I got up to 17,000 feet. It's brutal. If you've never had that kind of, it takes like at least a day and a half to adjust to that with like flu-like symptoms. I don't know whether I could do it now. We're talking 11 years ago. It was hard on me. But at any rate, I wrote a poem as I was leaving Tibet, and I'd like to end with that.
Okay.
Goodbye, Tibet. Goodbye, Tibet. You've pounded me with stone footprint blessings. Goodbye, Tibet. Not your occupied World War II France. Instead, I'll miss your continued magic and the chance of a talking statue, of a tuku serving butter tea that tastes like hot blue cheese dressing, and 1,000 kittens on the sunny steps of your monasteries. Goodbye, Guru in the rock and lake. Goodbye, Dakini of the psychedelic cliff. Goodbye, sovereign king and queen of ice and sky, and new litter of piglets. Goodbye, yak of dignity. Goodbye, home before I had one. Last glimpse green furred hills from the hatch as I board. My jet's plastic seat awaits. Robin Hood airplane movie, my crime novel, my punk history, my notebook. Goodbye, Tibet. I may never be strong enough again for your kiss. 3 weeks, I'm 57. Don't forget me. Leave a strange purple flower in my heart.
Thank you. That was wonderful. This has been New York Parrot Literary Corner. My name is Dustin Pickering, and we had Marc Olmsted here talking with us about Allen Ginsberg and Buddhism, amongst other wonderful subjects. If you've been listening in, this will be on YouTube. Please subscribe to our channel. And we're doing a 1 million subscriber challenge for those who are creative minds, or anybody would like to subscribe to the channel. Subscribe. We're trying to prove that creative minds support creative minds. And this is something we're doing to show the world what we're all about as creative minds. There's not enough supporting of each other right now, and we need your support. We support you. If you would like to be on the show, contact us. You can find me on Facebook, Dustin Pickering. You can message me privately, and we'll see if we can set you up with a date that works for you. And this has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. Like, again, subscribe to the channel.
Thank you so much, Mark,
Mark.
for your time with us. We sincerely appreciate. But before you go, it's very important if you can give us just 30 seconds of your last message to our viewers at home. Peace.
Take heart. Peace. Take heart.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you
viewers.
so much.
We'll
Thank
keep
our viewers as
updating
well.
you, giving you unique things. As we have Mark today, we also have other creative minds that will be joining us every day. This is a challenge we give to ourselves. We want to give the voice to creative minds on the TV. It's very rare. We don't have this kind of thing common across the globe. We have taken the challenge and we are ready to do the best we can for all the creative minds across the globe. Thank you so much for your time. See you next time.